All right, Ife, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Enjoying a nice rainy day here in Central Arkansas.
Is it like steady rain or is it like scattered showers?
It's turned into scattered showers. It had been pretty steady most of the morning. It's just now slowing down.
So this isn't the order I kind of wanted to go in, but this is kind of a natural flow off of what you just said, right? So
Okay.
imagine you just got a call. But what kind of so you're a professional, so let me back all the way up. You're a professional
Okay.
helicopter pilot, right?
Correct. I
Um,
fly EMS. Yes.
okay. So on a day like this, is steady rain. Uh, what are you concerned about as a pilot?
That I'm not going anywhere. So for my profession, especially as a VFR EMS pilot, which is the majority of the well, let me correct that. A lot of EMS is VFR. And I would hope
Visual,
I don't have to explain what VFR is, right? Because the
visual. I was
audience
just about to say visual flight rules, right?
correct. Right.
So, uh, how do you tell a middle schooler what VFR is?
That's okay. So yes, so so VFR means that we have to follow certain rules that mean that we have to navigate and do everything with the assumption that we can see, have certain cloud clearances and ceilings from the clouds before we can do any of our job. So all airline pilots are flying instrument flight rules, which means when you're on an airplane and the airplane goes in the clouds, those pilots don't care because they're under positive control. They're on a flight plan that allows them to go into the sky. In my profession, we do not. Even in the small number of people that do fly a single pilot IFR, meaning we do have helicopter pilots that they can go into the clouds. A lot of EMS is visual because when we land on a highway or in somebody's backyard or in some of the very weird places that I have landed, there is not an instrument approach to take them there.
Mm,
So they still have to have the weather to land in these weird places. So
mhm.
the IFR pilots, the instrument flight rule pilots, they can only land at maybe certain hospitals or airports. So a lot of our community is visual.
Okay, so that definitely means you have to avoid. I on a the last interview I did with Corey, who was an airline pilot, we briefly discussed get there itis, which is what a lot of pilots have to go through, and I have a similar theme that seems to occur in every discussion, including I've been recently having that discussion with my drone students, and they ask me every day, Mr. Booker, are we flying? Are we flying? Are we flying? And the other day I had them do a meteorology lesson. And so yesterday when they asked me, I said, you tell me, look at the winds, tell me if we can fly.
Mhm. That's so very important. I would imagine that when you're hang gliding, you're kind of limited on your power of what you can do. So winds are just as important to you as they are to us. And then I imagine you're also, because I know nothing about hang gliding, that's why I'm framing it this way. I
Right.
imagine you guys don't do so in the clouds. So you have to have certain cloud clearances and
Yes. For everything that I fly, drones and hang gliders, IFR is a no-no. Is don't even think about it. Like specifically, and I was going to ask you, what's the cloud? How low do you have to stay below the clouds and under VFR rules in a rotorcraft? Because I believe for drones under Part 107, and I just said this yesterday. Uh, I know it's a nice little bit, um, but you have to stay a certain level of feet below the clouds at all times.
yeah, so for it also depends on airspace, and my profession, we operate under Part 91
Okay.
and Part 135. So predominantly Part 135 because we're for compensation and hire. So even though we can operate under some Part 91 rules, Part 135 is still our Bible.
Mhm.
And for the most part, like if I'm in Class G airspace, I can operate clear of clouds,
Mhm.
but because I'm operating under Part 135, they typically want us to stay 500 feet below.
Yep.
So I can operate, um, if I stay at, because I have to be 300 feet above any congested area
Hmm.
when I'm flying. They prefer us to be higher. But what that means is that if for some silly reason I had to be out with an 800-foot ceiling, I'm still legal as long as I can be 300 feet above the ground, then I've got that 500-foot clearance.
Makes
But that's one of the kind of things that we don't like to push. But if we had to just to get home, then we could. But I know everybody's aware of the Kobe Bryant story, and that's a cautionary tale for any helicopter pilot to not take things for granted and not let your experience allow you or provoke you to start making stupid mistakes and decisions.
It's so crazy because when you talk about like how all aircraft have some of the same air sense, right? Um, I don't have any rotorcraft experience aside from a discovery flight that I took many moons ago. Um, but we hang glider pilots live and die by the mountains, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah, makes sense.
so when those story reports first came out and I saw the flight path they took, I didn't even have to wait for the NTSB report. I knew what happened.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
you know that because
Unfortunately, unfortunately, I'd say probably 8 out of 10 helicopter crashes, and that's a whole lot. I know that's, let's just say, let's say 4 out of 5, because 8 out of 10, let's go 3 out of 5. No, I'd probably go with 4 out of 5. It's usually because of weather. It's usually because bad decisions were made. Oftentimes when I hear of a helicopter crashing, and most of us, the first thing we ask, what was the weather?
Mhm.
And oftentimes just from reading a news story, um, you can you can read certain things like, the witness said that they heard the helicopter and it sounded like it was right on top of their house. you know they said it was raining or storming. I mean, those are clues that we all pitch in on. And so I know this is a kind of morbid conversation to be in, but I think it's just so important, especially as a VFR pilot, to always, we operate in an environment that has us closer to the ground than most airplanes operate.
Mhm.
And like you said, as a hang glider pilot, the mountains is like like it's where you operate. And when I say air sense, I know that you can be on a mountaintop and you can know what direction is north, south, east, and west pretty easily. That kind of air sense. You know what you're looking for. You know how to, see and avoid. You know how to be very cautious of what's to your left and right, up and down. That's the kind of air sense that every pilot needs to have. So um, and it gets more in depth, but again, helicopters, we just operate in an environment that's so much lower. And then we have to be on the lookout for airplanes taking off and landing at, general aviation airports everywhere. We got to be on the lookout for agricultural aircraft out. We got to be on the lookout for, birds, because we're flying so low, birds are usually down there with us. So you got to have that air sense to be out and about looking around, and to decide to fly in weather that is not optimal. That just adds one more thing that can take you down to your. And I know, again, I know it's kind of morbid, but we always think, there's a saying that helicopter pilots are always looking for what could go wrong.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and you have to, right? Because
Yeah,
that old saying, it comes from construction: measure twice, cut once. So like you have to constantly think about this, and even that's why. And no matter what you're learning, be it you're becoming a commercial drone pilot, private pilot, single engine glider, whatever, the FAA has you go over the 5 hazardous attitudes. Um,
right.
and and you know having to that was actually my drone students, that was the very first lesson we learned. And so like we and it's important because if you don't have that mindset and you just think that nothing is going to happen to you, eventually something's going to happen to you.
Yeah. It's a very unforgiving business. So if you're not paying attention, you're either going to destroy equipment or you're going to lose lives, or both.
Hmm.
So but it's a very rewarding career. It's a career full of regulations and policies that are mostly written in blood. We have a saying in our community, when you see something written in red, that means it's written in blood. Again, it's morbid, but you know.
I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I'm so glad you said that. I'm so going to show this video to my students because I say that all the time to them, right?
It's
Like,
the
oh,
truth. It's
right.
the absolute truth. I mean, we can sit here and chuckle, but I have lost friends in helicopter mishaps, in airplane mishaps, and sometimes we grind our teeth and we groan when we have to add a new policy that we feel is stupid, but it comes from somewhere and it comes from a very important place. And everything that's put out there is to bring people home alive because, I fly with two people in my back seat, not even counting the pilot who had not even counting the patient, correction, who has not counting the patient, but two people in the back seat who have no access to the controls. And so they're trusting me with their lives and they're trusting me to get them home at night to their families. And I'm trusting myself to get myself home to my family.
Right.
So when following rules and regulations and policies, to understand that they are there for a reason and usually written in blood makes them a whole lot easier to follow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Um, and just understanding it can happen to you if you're not careful or anybody.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, a few months ago, there was a crash that took everyone on board, and it happened somewhere on the East Coast. And I'll never forget the pilot's brother telling me that that he passed up 3 airports with bad weather, and so that's one of those things that's like, stop doing it, put the helicopter down. It's a helicopter, you can just put it down. You can put down a drone, you can put down, I don't know about hang gliding. I know you have to go for a certain spot, but you're not going to be out there in bad weather anyway.
Right.
If it's not clear through 22, I don't think you guys are usually out there.
Yeah. There are days where it's clear sunny skies and we're not flying because the winds aren't right.
Right, and there's for a reason. So
Mhm.
anyway, I'm sorry to open that up on such a morbid note, but
It
um
is real though. So let's talk about you for a little bit. What made Ife Caldwell become a helicopter pilot?
oh, weird story. Okay, I'll tell you the short version. It was something I'd never considered, never even thought about. I was first exposed to helicopters when I was in Bosnia in 1998. I was a young dental hygienist in the army, in Bosnia on a peacekeeping mission, and I was stationed at a field hospital where outside my it's called a ISU 90. Right outside of the container was the helipad, and I used to watch the Blackhawks come in there all the time. And I was like, man, that is cool. And that's where I fell in love with them. They, when you're on deployment and sometimes the helicopters get bored, they do what they call MWR rides. They're morale, welfare, and recreation, like let's keep the soldiers happy. I went on one. We did a lot of low level stuff, treetop stuff and just zooming around. And I was like, this is awesome. And I was like, oh, I would love to do this, but it's probably not even ever in the cards for me. And a couple of years later, I was in Fort Benning, Georgia, when the openings came up, and a friend of mine was like, Faye, put in a packet. And I'm like, I'm sure you got to be real smart to be a helicopter pilot. And it was one of those things that I didn't see people like me doing. And so to me, it still wasn't really a possibility. I submitted that packet and got accepted. And that was all she wrote. It was not an easy path, but it was one that meant so much to me that everything was worth it.
So did you go to Warren Officer Candidacy School in Fort Rucker?
I did. I went to Warren Officer Kennedy School in Fort Rucker in 2003. And then, like, right after that, we did Aeromed, where you have to learn how flying affects your body and how your body can tell you lies when you're flying. So we had to learn that first. We did about 2 weeks of that, and then we went straight into flying.
Mm, that's deep, right? I mean, we've already went down the word path. We'll shy away from that for a minute. But yes, the aeromedical factors.
Yes.
Did you so you were at Fort Rucker. How long did that last?
For me, it was a total of 13 months, and that was because you go through certain phases of flight school. You go through primary, and then you go through instruments. And then you do, back in the day, we had 2 different tracks that don't exist anymore. So I won't even bring it up. So now it's just you pretty much do a short little a little phase of basic combat skills, learning how to read a map and follow the map and stuff like that. And then you went straight into your advanced airframe. I went
Mm,
into an aircraft that has been decommissioned now, showing my age. It's called a Kiowa Warrior, and it was a scout helicopter. And because it had weapon systems,
yep.
we flew rockets, 50 cal Hellfire, stuff like that. It lasted a little bit longer because the weapons portion of the course lasted about 5 to 6 weeks. So I didn't have what they call bubbles. Like I went straight from primary to instruments and then straight into, I had very little bubbles. So flight school can last some people up to 2 years if you get stuck in a bubble. And what a bubble is just a period that you're waiting to move to the next phase because the next phase might not start right away.
So what do people do during those bubbles?
They get stuck on crappy details. Oftentimes it's just Army details that just need to be done. And because there's such a large population of flight school students who have rank on their shoulders or on their chest, we get stuck with those details.
Mm, that's
It's
interesting.
best to go through without a bubble if you can.
Right. They put you wherever the big green machine needs you, right?
Exactly.
So, because that's interesting, right? Because I know they have that whole system the Army does where they'll have you take the SIF test, and if they accept
Yes.
you, going to warrant officer candidacy school. So they
Mhm.
move you on pretty quickly, right?
Yes, and since the audience is a middle school audience, I would really like to say, you know, going into flying helicopters is an extremely expensive venture. Anything that you get quoted for help for airplanes, you can easily triple it. And that's what you're looking at for helicopter training. I don't like to push people toward the military because I don't like to be that, I'm not a recruiter.
Right.
But I will tell you that there is something special about letting the military pay for your dreams. There is a cost, and that cost is your time. And ultimately, be realistic, it's the military. It could be worse than that. But for me, it was worth it. There are 2 tracks, 3 tracks actually. You can go high school to flight school, and that's what I'd like to mention to your young people. It's
Hmm.
called high school to flight school, but it's also called street to sea because there are people who come in from college and
Right.
go. The plan is the track is you submit the packet. Um, I don't know exactly how to do that, but I know plenty of people who have done it. But you would go to basic training. From basic training, you go to warrant officer candidate course. And then from warrant officer candidate course, you begin your track as a pilot, as a warrant officer. Now, um, things have changed since I went through many moons ago. So you actually go through officer basic course before you go through flight school. Now they front loaded all that stuff that used to be done at the end when I went through. So you'd have to go through all the navigation, land nav, shooting, dunker training, all that stuff. That SEER course, you have to go through SEER-C now. You'd have to do all that up front before you start flying these days. So
That makes sense.
but that's one way. And then the other way is when you're in the Army already in a job. For me, it was dental. For some people, they might be crew chiefs. As an enlisted person, before you either submit a packet to go to warrant officer candidate course, or you can go to college and then hope to get pulled into the JRTC programs, ROTC,
Yep.
where they pull you in and you have a high enough grade, you're high enough on the OML to be able to choose to be a pilot. So there's different kind of ways to get in there, but it's really good to let the military pay for something like that because not only do they pay you, but then you get the experience and you get the qualifications without having to pay all the money.
That makes sense. That
And
definitely makes sense.
And
Um,
one last thing is once you even get the training, let's say you spent like 70, $80,000 just to get to the commercial level. Now you have to build up the hour level to even be able to get hired. So people could think, oh, it's only going to cost me 70 or $80,000 and I'll be able to get a job. No, you still got to build to, in my industry, 2,000 hours before you can even get hired.
so 2000 is it the FAA requirement or is the industry requirement?
It is the industry requirement
Okay.
for jobs like this, and that's mainly an insurance thing.
Hmm. I was going to say that because there's what the FAA requires for you to minimally be doing it, but There's what somebody is going somewhere in some office that's going to make a decision that doesn't want to be paying out a huge check to somebody because something went wrong, that
Right.
wants to have a certain amount of hours present. And so if somebody, let's say, didn't go the aviation warrant officer route in either the Army or the Coast Guard or one of the other branches, and what would be other ways?
I will say that I can only speak for the Army because it's the only branch I know, but I do know that the Army is the only branch that you don't have to have that college degree.
Mhm,
Every other branch requires you to have a college degree in order to be an officer, period.
that's right.
And I want to say that every other branch does not allow their warrant officers to fly. I think there's been changes
Mhm,
about that, but every other branch requires you to be what we call a real live officer because we're all commissioned.
right.
But so I can speak for the Army. I know what the other branches don't do, and I don't know how they go about commissioning their people to fly.
Yeah, the Air Force doesn't even have warrant officers.
No,
Uh,
they don't.
they haven't had them for some time. Um, so that is definitely a good point. So like if you haven't gone the military route, what other way would you be able to bill your time?
A lot of people do it with tourism,
Okay.
because you can build your because every so you've got just like in airplanes, you've got like the piston engine and then you got turbine engine.
Mhm.
Well, all the good jobs are in the turbine engine, and nowadays the tourism world does a lot of their flying in turbine engine, so it's a good way to get into that. You could also build time as a CFI, certified flight instructor, just like in the fixed wing industry.
Right, right.
Um, it's just that it tends to be a little bit harder to build time in the fixed wing community because turbine engine flight is so expensive.
Mhm.
I know a guy here in Arkansas who's flying his piston, his Robinson for $500 an hour. So you can easily just double that for a turbine engine. So tourists, some police departments, you can fly dual pilot and come in there as a very low time pilot and build time there. And some police departments don't require you to be a police officer. Many of them do. Many of them will also put you through flight school. I know a lot of the state police will train you from zero to hero.
Mhm.
So that's another route. But tourism, police, CFI, those are the biggest ones that I know of. Some people do the offshore thing, fly dual pilot, doing the offshore oil rig stuff. So those are predominantly the main ways that people build rotor wing time in the civilian sector.
Mm. So so when you came into, so describe your transition from flying Army helicopters to flying medevac helicopters for the civilian world.
Well, okay. So as I said, here in the civilian world, it's pretty much all single pilot, and in the Army, that's pretty much unheard of because our helicopters are so advanced; they all require two pilots. I was lucky enough to get stationed in a place where I was flying what they call a basic helicopter. It was like a OH-58 Alpha Charlie, and you could still fly that thing single pilot. So
Mm,
I built up a lot of time doing that, training other what we did, it was called JRTC. I always get ROTC and
right,
JRTC confused.
right,
That's
right.
why I stumbled earlier. But we flew JRTC where we sit at altitude or we have someone in our left seat who may or may not be a pilot who's observing operations and what's going on. Usually they are pilots because they're evaluating other pilots. So we can either get to a higher altitude and watch the combat aircraft do their maneuvers and they get evaluated. So we're just flying them around. So that's where I got lucky is I flew a lot of single pilot time before I even got my job. And that's pretty much what set me up for this job because even a lot of pilots coming out of the Army with a lot of experience have never flown with no one else sitting next to them. And it's a pretty significant feeling when you're sitting there by yourself and you're cranking the helicopter up and there's nobody talking to
Mm,
you. It's a very different feeling to fly, with no one else but yourself.
mm,
It takes a while to kind of get used to that, trusting your own instincts and what you're training and what you know to be right to safely operate. and do what you have to do. So um, the transition for me was easy because of that, because I had that time.
So describe what flying the worldly for fun is like for Ife Caldwell. You just flying for fun. What's that like?
Flying for fun.
Mhm. First of all,
So that's
what kind of bird are you flying? If you're just flying for fun, what are you flying?
well, the only thing I can probably afford is a is a Cessna 172.
Okay, let's not even let's take that out of it. Let's suppose let's suppose I don't know, Jay-Z just came along and said, Ife, fly whatever you want. What we flying today? What are you picking?
Oh, I'm picking a I'm picking a Sikorsky, an S-76.
Oh wow.
So it's not as big as a Black Hawk, but it has all the bells and whistles, you know. That would be some fun flying. It's got power, it's got great tail rotor authority. You can get down in that. Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's what I'm choosing.
All right. And what's the day like?
Uh,
Clear skies,
I
right?
I still want it to be clear skies. Although, even from having fun, I would like to, I'd probably still in fun, because even in fun, we're still training, right?
Right, right,
So I probably would like to still file an IFR flight plan, go some distance, and if I go in the clouds, get some actual instrument time, because
right.
that's hard to come by as well. So, I would plan for both, but even if I did choose a day where I'm in the clouds, I'd still want it to be as light on wind as possible.
Sense. That definitely makes sense. That makes, speaking of wind, what's the ugliest turbulence you've ever experienced?
Ooh. Oh, I'd like to say that's actually pretty common in the springtime
Mhm.
where we're working, you'll have oftentimes you get the most turbulence on clear days. If you're talking to your students about meteorology and you talk about cold fronts and warm fronts, you know that warm fronts that bring this layer of clouds usually is stable air, whereas cold fronts, you got the clear blue skies, but it's really windy.
That's right.
So those are the days that we're flying in pretty often because we got clear blue skies.
Mhm.
But it could be wind can be gusty on the ground, especially if you've got terrain around you, or you can get up to altitude where it's real gusty. So gusty pretty much means you're going to be turbulent. Um, the stuff that I really don't like is like I'm talking about low level flying. Okay, so of course I'm not talking about the 3,500 feet and above. I'm talking about 1,500 feet and below, really.
Right.
So a lot of our turbulence is like that mechanical stuff, coming off of other buildings or other terrain or even coming from the ground. A lot of the stuff that we get. Um, but I hate it when I have a windy time at night because you lose some of your visual references.
Mhm.
So when it's windy and it's nighttime and you're having to circle to land, it can be a little bit of an uncomfortable feeling. And now you've got these goggles on you, which give you a 40-degree field of view and everything is green. Um, and it's supposed to help, but it can sometimes, disorient you a little bit more. So
Mhm.
I am very confident and comfortable flying in it, but I prefer when it's not.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Hmm.
So you mentioned the 172. So do you fly fixed wing as well?
I do. I do. That's the only thing I can afford to do for fun.
Okay.
In the fixed wing, I've only got a private add-on and an instrument add-on. I'm not commercial rated in
Okay.
fixed wing.
So basically that's usually what you're doing when you're doing leisurely flying. You're in
Right.
you're in the 172. Well, the 172 is so versatile. I guess that's why so many flight schools use it. And to mention
Absolutely.
it's probably the lowest cost of general aviation airplanes. You ever
I
had
think the only thing, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was gonna ask if you ever had any chance to get into any of the light sport aircraft.
No, I've not. I'd say the smallest that I've flown would be a Cessna 150. I've not I can't actually say I'm not as adventurous as, people like to think that all aviators are. I don't even know if I'm gutsy enough for the light sport. That's pretty gutsy, I mean, I'm not even a fan of skydiving, so I put
Right.
that right up there with skydiving.
Oh wow.
It gets blown around and everything.
I will say that is definitely a very different it's a very different flight experience. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I say, all aircraft ultimately obey the same laws of physics, but
Absolutely.
still, the way an aircraft is built,
Hmm.
the center of gravity, how you,
Hmm.
all of it, right? The way the
They
wing,
all feel different. Yeah.
right? It's a different feel. So,
Mhm.
and I think that's been an issue with a lot of general aviation pilots that have spent many years flying a 172, and they in the 172 or one. But as soon as they hop on an LSA aircraft, um, you know what I mean? It's a very different feeling, and they don't have the time to like adjust, or
I never
they're
thought about it that way. Yeah.
rushing themselves before they're ready. You know, and it's just like I said, it's a different ball game. So
It is a very different ballgame. Yeah.
and so
Just going to turbine engines alone, going to jet engines is a whole different ballgame. Yes.
so there, but you know, it's I I mean it I guess with me, um I um I got into aviation mostly for fun and for recreation, and with the intent of learning how to fly something that would be a low cost teaching tool to future students.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
guess the ultralight drone and light sport aircraft route was inevitable, right?
Okay.
Um,
I
but
just love that how everybody's path to aviation is so different. I
right,
love hearing things like that because there's so many different ways into it and things that you're looking for out of it. So
absolutely. And you know, there's, I mean, even with helicopters, right? Because I think the beauty of helicopters is, like you were saying earlier, you can put them down, and if like, I mean, for your type of mission that you're flying, an air ambulance,
mhm.
I mean, we'll see what happens when they come up with these air taxis. I know they're trying to turn quadcopter drones into like passenger ready aircraft. Uber was trying that for a minute, but I think they've relinquished that and tried to do something else. I think they have some functioning trial air taxis going on in China. Um, but we're a little ways from that. Right now, that mission is possible because of the helicopter. And
Yeah,
so, like, even with short takeoff and landing airplanes, they still don't have the juice that helicopters have.
yeah, yeah. It's I can tell you it would be pretty interesting to see how that comes to be. Um as we all know, I mean, learning how to hover a helicopter is not easy at all. So it would be, I mean, I would imagine that,
You mean it's
these
not like in video games, Ife? You can just put it up and it stays there.
I'm gonna tell you the truth. I can't even hover a video game. I if I don't have the feeling of it and the gravity, I I am not a fan of simulators and video games.
Hmm.
I don't have the coordination for it. So it's interesting. Some people are very good at video games, and I think it'll make them great pilots too. I'm one of those people who gathered my experience from actually flying the helicopter. So simulators are not fun to me. I didn't have a simulator for the first what 1,500 hours I flew. So
Wow.
um, so except for the instrument portion was done. But anyway, it will be interesting to see how these air taxis build, because I would imagine that they're going to build these things to where you don't need the skill to hover like a helicopter. I'd imagine it's all built into the aircraft. But um you know separating traffic in the air, I imagine, would be very complicated at that point. So it'll be interesting to see how that happens, how that comes to be.
That definitely would be interesting.
I'll tell you, I do not envy the air traffic controllers. They're
I mean, all the yahoos out there with a drone and just want to press their luck doing stuff that makes absolutely no sense are already giving air traffic controllers headaches, which is why the FAA is coming up with new drone regulations every 5 minutes.
Right.
So,
I want to say, if I recall correctly, drones, what is it, 300 feet or 400 feet before they're regulated by the FAA? What is it?
yep, 400 feet above ground level. Anything else, they got to get ATC clearance. And Class A airspace is completely off limits for any reason. You just,
Class A? Can they get up that high?
yes.
Wow. I didn't even know that.
There's a video where somebody took their drone up to 10,000 feet above the clouds, didn't check their battery life. Now, I admire this person for sharing their experience so that other people can learn from it. But I have to be real with you. I'm scratching my head as to how they went from decision A to decision Z without recognizing this.
That's dangerous.
Right,
That's so dangerous.
right,
And
right.
it's, I mean, it's not dangerous for them, but it's like you've got to be aware of other people in the air, because I couldn't imagine the catastrophe that my helicopter would, come across with the drone coming into contact with any part of my rotating system, tail rotor or main rotor.
Right, right. That would, yeah,
Catastrophic.
right, exactly, right. People don't realize that there are whole airplanes taken out by little bitty geese, right?
Yes, yes,
Like,
yes.
like geese and pigeons are taking out aircraft, let alone like full-fledged 20-pound drones. And
Well, and at least the geese and birds have the sense to move, or to do some kind of, avoidance. A
mhm,
drone, no, and if we don't see it, it's hard to, people think, oh, it's a big sky, you should be up. No, drones, birds, those things are hard to see until you're right up on them.
right up on them, right? And by the time you see them and you're right up on them, it's too late.
And like you said, this guy was up in the cloud. So luckily I wouldn't be up in there, but
Right,
there are definitely aircraft operating up there.
right. And
Helicopters, planes, bigger planes.
right. And luckily, like I said, luckily what ended up happening was just him running out of battery and it fell and it landed into a tree. I mean, even that alone, you take aircraft completely out of the equation. It could have been a police car, it could have landed in a
Yeah,
nursery with children playing in it, it could have landed on an old lady trying to cross the street. There's like a
yeah.
myriad different bad things that could have happened as the result.
Was he fined, or was
This
there
was
any
this was
repercussions?
pre-107. Like,
Mm.
we can call him one of the unintentional pioneers of the regulation.
I love the way you put that.
So,
Yes, yes. There's always a reason.
right.
That's
Anywho,
interesting.
but
I find that very interesting. Yes.
and like I said, it's only going to continue, right? Because people are going to keep pushing the envelope, and
Yes.
people are going to keep playing silly games and winning silly prizes. So,
I can tell you're a middle school teacher. Yes. Tell it like it is. I mean, you've really got to have that kind of, we can't coddle people when it comes to this kind of thing. This is a very unforgiving industry. There's no, oh well, bad thing. No, this will kill you dead.
right,
So
right,
you got to have that bluntness about you. So yeah, silly games do win silly prizes.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Ife, for spending some time with me and answering some questions. You have any parting advice for young aspiring 7th and 8th graders saying, she's flying helicopters, I want to do it too?
I say, if the bug bites you or has bitten you, the aviation bug, then you pursue that dream. You don't let anybody tell you what you cannot do.
No doubt. Thank
I
you
know that
so
seems
much.
like it's so caged, but it's so true,
Absolutely. Once you start, you can't stop, won't stop. You got to do it.
right? Well, Corey, it has been great chatting with you. Thank you for the opportunity, and if this message gets through to at least just one person, then I've done my job.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.